We can predict whether someone's going to be promoted, fired, or leave the company for a better job elsewhere based on the words they use in their email.
Dames en heren, van harte welkom bij DenkTank, de podcast van Denkproducties. Het doel van DenkTank is de leiders en professionals van Nederland nog beter maken in hun werk. Mijn naam is Christ Coolen en ik ben hier samen met
Hans Janssen.
Hans, welkom.
Ja, dank je.
Wij hebben net een bijzonder gesprek achter de rug, want we hebben gesproken met
Jonah Berger.
En nou kan het zijn dat mensen hem kennen, maar er zijn denk ik ook best wel wat mensen die hem nog niet zo goed kennen. Kun je even in één zin vertellen wie hij is?
In één zin. Nou, we hebben hem de geuzennaam de Wonderboy of Influence gegeven. Deze man is 43, heeft 4 boeken geschreven over subtiele en hele krachtige beïnvloeding, is Wharton professor en heeft 80 wetenschappelijke artikelen op zijn lijstje staan. En hij kan heel goed vertellen hoe je met hele kleine aanpassingen veel meer gedaan krijgt.
Het gesprek wat je dadelijk gaat luisteren is echt fabuleus. Hij geeft meteen allerlei hele praktische tips. Voordat we daar naartoe gaan, denk ik dat het ook even goed is om stil te staan bij waarom hebben wij met hem gesproken en wat was de aanleiding eigenlijk? Want dat moeten we ook even benoemen.
Ja, hij komt naar Nederland. Op 27 november komt hij spreken op het seminar Psychologie van het Overtuigen. En hij neemt daar het estafettestokje over van Robert Cialdini, die daar normaal gesproken als de internationale headliner staat, maar dit jaar wegens medische omstandigheden niet kan komen. En het leuke is, en dat staat niet in de podcast, dus dat doen we ook even over. Cialdini en ikzelf, wij waren op zoek naar de allerbeste vervanger, de opvolger van Cialdini. En we kwamen allebei op Jonah Berger uit. Dus dat is leuk.
En dus dat betekent dat Cialdini zelf eigenlijk heeft gezegd, nou, als iemand mij dan moet vervangen, laat het dan Jonah Berger zijn.
Inderdaad. En dat is natuurlijk een eer.
Dat is ook een zwaarwegende recommendation.
Zou je zeggen, hè? Ja. En ik zag ook dat staat ook in een van zijn boeken, dat Jim Collins bij hem in het klasje heeft gezeten. En dan denk ik, Jim Collins, die staat ongeveer 1, 2 en 3 op mijn wishlist van nog te halen sprekers. Niet slecht, toch? Nou.
Dus dit is toch wel weer een nieuwe mijlpaal in internationale sprekers, denk ik.
Ja, en ik denk dat het leuke daarvan is dat hij in Nederland, bijvoorbeeld hij zit in MBA in 1 dag van Ben Tichelaar. En Ben houdt echt wel zijn literatuur bij. En ik weet hoe zwaar hij het vindt om altijd een keuze te maken in het materiaal van MBA in 1 dag. En wat hij allemaal moet schrappen. Maar het werk van Jonah Berger zit er wel nog in. Dus Ben heeft in de gaten ook wel, dit is echt goede stuff.
Ja, dus super interessant. 27 november. En wat ik ook leuk vind aan die dag, dat is het seminar Psychologie van het Overtuigen, is dat eigenlijk, je hebt denk ik een beetje alle, hoe zou je het willen noemen, de sprekerskanonnen, de mensen die echt wat te melden hebben over overtuigen, psychologie, beïnvloeding, die heb je allemaal samengebracht in 1 dag.
Ja, dat is al jaren en het is een soort reunie van mensen die boeken schrijven over hoe kun je nou meer invloed krijgen op je klant, op je collega, op je baas, op jezelf. Hoe kun je beter presenteren? Hoe kun je beter met retorica je argumentkracht bijzetten? Het is een soort mixed grill, grand dessert van technieken om meer invloed te krijgen.
En dadelijk ga je dus luisteren naar het gesprek wat Hans en ik hadden met Jonah Berger. Mm-hmm. Wat ik daar zelf heel leuk aan vond, en ik ben ook benieuwd hoe jij dat ziet, is dat ik ben marketeer, dus ik kijk naar de wereld door een soort commerciële lens. En daar zijn deze technieken natuurlijk heel handig en nuttig en praktisch voor. Maar ik denk dat dit nog veel breder toepasbaar is. Dus ook in, of je nou in een grote organisatie zit of een kleine organisatie, je moet een budget verdedigen, je moet een plan erdoor krijgen, je moet mensen meekrijgen in een verandering. Dan gaat het er echt wel om hoe je dingen brengt, waar je mensen op aanspreekt, welke woorden je gebruikt. En hij heeft daar echt hele praktische, maar ook goed onderbouwde inzichten over.
Ja. Er zit 1 nog mooi voorbeeld in de categorie hoe breed toepasbaar is dit. Die je zelfs kunt gebruiken om je kinderen hun zooi te laten opruimen. Dat vond ik echt wel, die ga ik thuis even proberen.
Ja, dat is super mooi. Zijn er nog andere dingen die wij moeten zeggen tegen de luisteraar voordat wij gaan overschakelen naar het gesprek wat wij hadden?
Ik denk dat we ze gewoon veel luisterplezier moeten wensen.
Ja, ik denk het
Let's
ook.
go.
Dit is een half uur. Jonah Berger, veel plezier. En aan het einde komen Hans en ik nog even terug.
So let us properly introduce our guest of the day. Professor at Wharton Business School, author of 4 books
on persuasion and over 80 academic papers on the science of influence and persuasion. Here he is. He's going to take a sip from his drink, but I'll add him to the stage right now. There he is, Dr. Jonah Berger.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you in the show. How are you today? What time is it at your place? And how is the week for you? Just some random questions to get things started.
Wonderful. It is right after lunch where I am on the East Coast of the United States. And I'm excited to be chatting with you guys and even more excited to join you guys in a few weeks at the event.
Yes, because we do have to thank you personally, because we already explained to the audience when we were talking Dutch that you really help us out on this event, because our previous keynote speaker, Dr. Cialdini, cannot make it today and that day, but you actually tweaked your Thanksgiving plans a bit as well, right? Because this is a very important week for people in the USA, Thanksgiving, right?
It is, yes. The Thursday of the week is a big national holiday, but Cialdini has had a big impact on my career. Part of the reason I got interested in studying influence, and much of my work builds on some of the work that he's done. And so it's, no one can replace him, but it will be an honor to try. And I'm excited to participate in the event.
Yes, great. All right. So we've prepared a few questions for you based on on the two books, The Catalyst and Magic Words. We also decided, because influence is a very interesting theme, but it's getting super exciting when you try to transfer it to a specific business challenge that you have. So before we get going on the inside of one of your first books, Chris, we have kind of a case study that everybody in the audience could relate to, that we want to ask Professor Berger to reflect on a specific case and see how we can apply the ideas that we just got in this situation.
So that we'll do that after in the talk.
In the talk. But the case is, shall we present it over here?
Yeah.
So we have many of our audience members are managers and leaders in a bigger organization, and they have to persuade their boss. They want to have budget for a plan, and the plan will cost money and effort in the beginning and will have a positive outcome in the end, but they don't know for sure. So we will try to apply the ideas that you will be sharing to the specific situation of how to persuade my boss to give me budget. Is that okay?
Sounds perfect.
Good. All right. Let's go. Before we start really discussing your books, you have a really great test in one of your books. In this book, Invisible Influence, that demonstrates the impact of influence in a wider sense. Can you do that test with us?
Sure. So I want everyone to play a quick game with me for just a minute. Bear with me. I'm gonna give you a memory test. Okay. And so
for everyone in the audience, it's not just for us, for everybody who's attending.
Yes. For everybody listening, I'm gonna give you a memory test. And so I'm gonna say 7 words, and I'm not gonna write them down. I'm just gonna say them aloud. And I'm going to see how many of them you can remember. Okay? So the first word is reckless. The second word is furniture. The third word is conceited. The fourth word is corner. The fifth word is aloof. The sixth word is stapler. And the seventh word is stubborn. And I'll say that one more time. So reckless, furniture, conceited, corner, aloof, stapler, and stubborn. So it's a memory test. I'm gonna give you a little break before I give you the test. And so I'd like you to do something else just in that time. I'm gonna give you a brief description of someone, and their name happens to be Donald, but you can think about this as someone you might know. And I want you to listen to the description, and then I'm gonna ask you to answer a couple of questions about this person. Okay? Donald spent a great amount of his time in search of what he liked to call excitement. He has climbed Mount McKinley, done the Colorado Rapids in a kayak, driven in a demolition derby, and piloted a jet-powered boat without knowing much about boats. He has risked injury and even death a number of times. Now he was in search of new excitement. He was thinking perhaps he would do some skydiving or maybe cross the Atlantic Ocean in a sailboat. By the way he acted, one could readily guess that Donald was perfectly aware of his ability to do many things well. Other than business skills, Donald's contacts with people were rather limited. He felt he didn't really need to rely on anyone. Once he made up his mind to do something, it was good as done, no matter how long it might take or how difficult it might be. Only rarely did he change his mind, even when it might have been better if he had. Now, I realize you've never met this person before. I just gave you a description of him. But based on just this description alone, if you had to pick one word to describe Donald, what would that word be? And I'll let you think about it for just a moment. What would that word be to describe this person that I just told you about, whose name happens to be Donald?
Okay, I would say he is a reckless kind of person, right?
Okay.
Overconfident.
Overconfident. So you are not alone. You two are not alone. I haven't seen all the answers from the rest of the people listening today, but when I've done this exercise before with similar question, asked people similar things, many people describe Donald pretty negatively, right? They thought he was reckless, a bit conceited, just like you said, confident, right? Crossing the Atlantic in a sailboat is risky. He seems like he's a little bit full of himself. He's very aware of his abilities. He doesn't listen to others. You might describe him as stubborn. It wouldn't be surprising if you thought he was thought of him as negatively. But I'm going to ask you a different question now, different than what I've asked you so far. Right? What if I asked you to imagine different words before him? Rather than the list of words I asked, which, to remind you, included a variety of different words, those 7 words I said at the beginning. What if I had asked you to remember a completely different set of words? The description of Donald, how I described him, would be the same, but the memory list would be different. Would your perceptions of Donald have changed? And when I've asked people this question, I've asked a lot of people this question, they're probably having they have the same reaction you probably are having right now, which is, well, of course not. Right? I mean, why would the random words you asked me to remember, have any impact on how I perceive this person that you gave me a description of, right? The description is the same. The words are the same. Why would those initial random words you asked me to remember, those unrelated words, have an impact? And unfortunately, you and they are wrong, right? Because when a different set of people was asked to remember a separate set of words initially, rather than words like conceited, reckless, aloof, stubborn, those words that I gave you, they were asked to remember words like adventurous or self-confident or independent or persistent. Well, those words completely changed how they saw Donald, right? Now they saw him in a much more positive light. Rather than seeing him as risky, they saw him as adventurous. Rather than seeing him as needing others and signaling his aloofness, they saw him as independent. And so the same person, same description of that person was judged completely different. And you might say, well, why? Why would those words matter? And the reason is that influence often happens invisibly. It often happens without our awareness. And in this case, those words I asked you to remember, which included words like stapler and corner and other things, but hidden within those words were a number of words like reckless and conceited and aloof and stubborn, right? Those words activated certain things in your mind, which then spilled over to affect how you judge Donald. And if you had different words, you would have judged him differently. And all that happened without your awareness. And all of that is driven by the power of non-conscious influence. And so part of what my work has done is sort of looked into these unconscious, often invisible influences and better understand how they work.
Great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm very impressed. I'm already getting more curious and I want more.
Yes.
Very nice.
I was thinking if you have this case for the board, we should probably hang up posters that says generous and, just to frame them in the really right direction, right?
Often I think one thing I would say is often influence works a little bit differently than we think it does, right? Often we think to influence others, we need to have authority. We need to be in charge. We need to be the boss. We need to control something. We need to have power. And that's certainly the case sometimes. It's certainly the case that telling people to do something or saying, I'm going to punish you if you don't do that, that at least on the surface can make it look like we influence them, can make it look like they did what we wanted. But even in those situations, if they don't want to change, if we haven't actually influenced them, we just told them what to do, they're not really going to do what we want them to do. And further, even in situations where we don't have power, we don't have authority, the same approaches, by really understanding how influence works, can help us there too. And so I think there's really a new science of influence out there, which is less about pushing people and more about understanding what the barriers are to change and figuring out how to make it.
Yes. That's a very good connection to this book, The Catalyst, with a brilliant subtitle, How to Change Anyone's Mind. Because I think in this book, you also talk about not trying to push harder, but trying to take away barriers to say yes, right? Because sometimes we just want to go for it and give extra power to our persuasive efforts. But your story in this book is actually just first try to understand what causes people not to say yes at this moment, and try, when understanding them, makes it easier to remove them and get towards a yes, right? Yes.
Yeah, I think the challenge, whether you're trying to get funding from your board, whether you're trying to get your boss to support something, whether you're trying to get a colleague to agree with you, whether you're trying to get an organization to support a new change initiative, in all those situations, we tend to jump to influence. We tend to jump right away to saying, this is what I want to have happen. And we tend to list all the reasons why, or provide all the information why people should do what we want them to do. But here's the challenge. If we don't understand our audience, if we don't understand the people or groups or organizations that we're trying to change, it's going to be really hard to get them to move, right? Too often we jump right to understand it, right to influence. We want them to do what we want. But if we don't understand them, it's going to be hard to get that to happen. And so really what the book talks a lot about is why pushing doesn't work, why pushing might seem like a nice strategy, but is actually not going to be effective as we might think, and why removing barriers is often much more effective, whether we're the boss or whether beyond.
Yeah. You talk, one of the effects that you discuss in your book is the endowment effect. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but that's very intriguing. When I heard about it, I thought, oh, we really need to have this one in the conversation here. Can you tell us a bit about that, what it is and why it works?
Sure. Yeah. So let me imagine, I have a cup right here. So I'll put a cup up, right? Let me imagine that I gave you this cup and I said, hey, look, it's this nice, tall blue cup. I gave it to you and said, here you go. Thanks for coming today. I give you this wonderful blue cup. And then later on, I say, hey, by the way, there were some people who came today who weren't able to get a blue cup. How much would you sell this cup to them for? If I asked you how much you would be willing to accept to sell this cup to someone else, and I asked you that amount, you might say, I don't know, $3, $4, $5, something like that. But if I then asked a different set of people who I didn't give the cup to yet, I said, hey, here's this wonderful cup. It's not yours yet, but how much would you pay someone else to get this cup? You would think the two answers would be the same, right? It's the same cup. It has the same attributes. It does the same thing. Whether I've given it to you already or not, it's the same thing. And so whether you have something or you don't have something shouldn't affect its value. But that's actually not what happens. It turns out that compared to someone who's just looking at something and providing their value, someone who has it already values it even more than someone else, right? The things that we already are endowed with, the things that are already in our possession, we value more than the things that aren't. Let me give you a simple example of it. Research shows that the longer you've lived in a home or an apartment, the more you value it. Above and beyond the market price. So sure enough, over time, a house or an apartment goes up in value. But if you've lived there for longer, you value it more. Why? Because it becomes yours and you become attached to it and you can't imagine letting it go. And so this is a big challenge for change and influence, right? Because if we think about the status quo or what people are doing already, they're already endowed with that thing, right? As companies, as organizations, as consumers, right? The board is already endowed with what they're currently doing. Consumers are already endowed with the products and services they're using. Our colleagues at the office are already endowed with the programs and initiatives we currently have going on. And the problem is they're going to value those things they're already doing more than new things, even when those new things are better. And so one challenge of change is getting people to let go of the past. They feel like old things are safe and new things are risky. Right? Old way of doing things, that's how we've always done it. It must be a good idea, but that's not actually the case. And so part of change, part of influence, part of persuasion is getting people to let go of what they've done previously, even though they value it.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't realize, we have a great idea, but we don't realize that people, to accept our great idea, have to let go of something they already feel very comfortable with, right?
Think about it when we're asking the board for funding, right? The board is not sitting there saying, do I want to give you funding or not? They're sitting there saying, well, what are we already giving funding to? Where is this funding going to come from? If you're trying to convince consumers or customers to buy something, they're not just sitting there going, well, do I like the thing you're selling? They're going, well, what am I doing currently? What product am I buying currently? What service am I using currently? And so their willingness to do something new doesn't just depend on how good that new thing is. It also depends on what they're doing already and getting them to let go of the old thing. And so that's one of the big challenges of change, not just telling people how good something new is, but getting them to let go of an old thing as well.
Yes, yes. Your newest book, I really like the title.
You are the title specialist. You have a very a thing for good titles.
Yes, but if I had to write a book and I would have called it Magic Words, What to Say to Get Your Way, I would have been really proud of myself.
And it's also the rhyme as a reason effect. Rhyming texts are easier believed to be true. So what to say to get your way is also invisible influence.
Yes.
Very smart.
So what got you to write this book, as a fourth book in your...
we use language all the time, right? You and I are talking to one another right now using language. When I make a presentation and I have a PowerPoint deck, I'm using written language. Language is how salespeople sell, they're how leaders lead, and they're even how parents parent. And so we spend a lot of time using words and language. But while we think a lot about the ideas we want to get across, right? As I was coming to talk to you today, I thought about, okay, what are the big picture ideas of influence I want to communicate to people? We think a lot less about the specific words we use to communicate those ideas, right? The individual words that we share. But unfortunately, that's a big mistake because subtle shifts in the language you use can have a big impact on our own effectiveness. Adding a particular word to a request can make people about a third more likely to say yes. Saying I recommend something rather than I like that thing can make people about 25% more likely to take your recommendation. And in a host of domains, from the language you use at the office, let's say over email, to the language that someone might use in their applications for a loan, provides subtle insight into who those people are and what they're going to do in the future. We can predict whether someone's going to be promoted, fired, or leave the company for a better job elsewhere based on the words they use in their email. There's work on loans that says the words that people use when they apply for loans can provide insight into whether they're going to pay those loans back or not. And so the simple question is, what are these magic words and how can we take advantage of their power? There's been a huge shift in the past couple of decades, both to digitize things, right? At the end of this recording today, you may be able to press a button and spit out a transcript of everything that was said. Billions of people every day share their opinions online, on social media and other places. There's a variety of recorded language that's out there. But second, there's all these new tools, right? We talk about large language models and ChatGPT, but also more simple tools like dictionaries and word embeddings and topic modeling. And so these tools have allowed us to extract insight from language data. And so I've spent the last 10 years or so using these tools to understand both the words that we use and how we can use them more effectively. And that's what this book is all about.
Great. There's one question coming in from Anna, which could be good to address at this point. She says that are the words that people prefer or want to use, is it dependent on personality types or is it universal?
Yeah, so great question. And so the book, as many of my books are divided into different topics, right? They're different types of language and the impact of those types of language. So I talk about why asking people to be a helper rather than help might make them more likely to actually do what you want them to do, for example. I talk about why when you're trying to be creative and solve problems, thinking about what you could do rather than what you should do will make you a better problem solver. And so there are lots of simple ways, subtle shifts in the words or phrases that we use that can increase our impact and our success in a variety of different domains. Some things are certainly context dependent, right? So take a word like you, for example, Y-O-U. Second person pronouns like the word you can be beneficial, right? Research that I've done and others have done on social media, for example, shows that using the word you can help grab attention and increase engagement with content. At the same time, there are situations or contexts where you is not as impactful. In fact, where you can be detrimental. On customer support pages, for example, using the word you can make people feel blamed or like they're responsible and can so make them less satisfied, feel like content is less helpful. And so there are certain words or phrases that are often useful to achieve certain impacts, but others are more like tools, right? Just like sometimes you need a hammer and other times you need a saw. Sometimes certain language may be better and others may be better. So it's about understanding those contexts and how we should apply different things in different contexts.
Great. Yeah. So you already mentioned a lot of examples, should versus could, etc. Do you have a favorite one that you actually were perhaps amazed by yourself when doing the research on the impact that a subtle change in language can have?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about help versus helper for a second, because I think it's a small one, but it's so powerful. So there's this great old study where they went into a first grade or kindergarten classroom and they asked kids to help clean up. And for some kids, they said, hey, can you help clean up? And for other kids, they said, hey, can you be a helper and clean up the classroom? And again, the difference between help and helper is very small. It's only adding a couple letters to the end of help. Yet those couple letters led people to be about a third more likely to clean up the classroom. And if you think about why, and there's been a number of papers that have shown similar things, it's all about the difference between actions and identities, right? We all want to take desired actions. We all want to be helpful and vote and exercise and eat healthy. We all want to do all those things, but we're busy. We don't always have time to do all of those things. But what we care more about than taking certain actions is holding desired identities. We all want to see ourselves as smart and knowledgeable and maybe a little bit funny and a little bit athletic and all these positive characteristics. And so we do things, we take actions to hold those identities. We want to see ourselves as athletic, we better go running once in a while. If we want to see ourselves as knowledgeable, we better read the news. We engage in actions to facilitate those desired identities. And so what that means is if you can frame an action, like helping, as a way to claim a desired identity, like being a helper, it makes people more likely to take that action, right? Helping, sure, I know I should help, but I'm busy. But if you make that an opportunity to be a helper, well, now I'm much more likely to do it because I want to claim that desired identity. And so by framing actions one way rather than another, subtle shift, you can increase people's likelihood of doing them. Even the same is true, but in the opposite direction. You want people to avoid doing something. Research finds, for example, that if cheating on a test would make you a cheater, people are a lot less likely to do it. Similarly, losing is bad, but feeling like doing something would make you a loser is even worse. And so when you frame negative things rather than actions as identities, makes people less likely to do them. There's a famous old campaign saying, don't be a litter bug, not just don't litter, which is an action, but don't be a litter bug, which is an identity, made people much less likely to litter because framing that action as a way to achieve an undesired identity made people less likely to do it.
Yes.
So when I use this knowledge in a company, like in the request for the board or something, reminding somebody of this positive identity, like can you switch trustful boss mode? Can you be a trustful boss? Yes. And then ask for a risky thing? Then Hans would be more likely to comply to my request.
Even think about the difference between saying someone is innovative versus they're an innovator. Someone leads or they are a leader. But if I told you about two people...
All words are about identity.
Yes. This person leads or this person is a leader. Which of them do you think leads more often? You'd say the person is a leader because it sounds like a stable trait. It sounds like a part of who they are. And so if we want to get people to do things, frame those things as ways to achieve desired identities, and they'll be much more likely.
Great. There's one question which I think is perhaps the question that's asked you the most, but over here as well by Marjan Mouvret, really nice name. She's asking about, if you get people to say yes and you persuade them in a certain direction, are they still independent in what they decide? Is there, will they feel perhaps tricked into something? What's the
great question. Yeah. We often feel like influence is a dirty word, is a negative word, right? We feel like influence is somehow forcing someone to do something. But I think a lot of what I talk about in The Catalyst, as well as all my books, is it's not about forcing people to do something. It's about helping people to see why doing something is in their best interest, why it's in line with their values, with their needs, their wants, and so on. And so I think when influence and persuasion works really well, we're not forcing someone to do something. We're helping someone to see that something that we wanted them to do is actually valuable for them, right? Encouraging them to go in a certain direction, but not forcing them down.
Yes, so I think you are on the same page as Bob Cialdini here. And of course, I think if you're a researcher on influence, you have also written handbooks for manipulation, right? So you really need to apply it in the right way in order to to have a license to do it, actually, right?
Certainly, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Just looking forward to having you on our stage on the 27th. Have you already decided what you're going to talk about?
I haven't, but I am certainly going to talk about influence. I think I'm going to talk about the catalyst, but I'm going to let it get a little bit closer and think about what might be most relevant for the audience. But I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to speak to the group. I think there's a lot of exciting science out here, new ways to think about influence, and really practical ways to use it. And so, my goal is always to share science through stories to help people understand how they can use it in their everyday lives. And I look forward to sharing that with the group.
And I think for our audience, The Catalyst is a very useful book, because you can use these techniques in what you say, everyday life, in big or small organizations, guiding instead of pushing. And so I think that's a really practical knowledge to gain on the 27th of November.
Yes. Can we have one final question for you? We will take the question of Bram, because Bram is one of our viewers. And he says, so how do we get people to let go of old patterns? So how do we make them open to changing their minds?
This is a longer conversation, but what I will say is start with the ideas of the catalyst and start with understanding them. Right? The better you understand your audience, what their barriers, their roadblocks are, rather than asking, what could I do to get them to change, asking why haven't they changed already, will help you get a better understanding of their challenges and help you move them in the right direction. But it's a great question, and I look forward to sharing more answers to it when I see you guys in a few weeks.
Dit was Jonah Berger. Ja, in gesprek met ons.
Ja, gek hè? We konden onszelf nu even af.
Ja, dus dat was leuk. Volgens mij hadden we nog wel een paar uur met hem willen praten.
Hij verzamelt zulke gave content.
Ja.
En ik kan daar echt wel van smullen.
Ja, ik vond zelf een van de mooiste dingen. En als je heel veel dingen, als je ze hoort, dan denk je, oh ja, natuurlijk, dit is zo logisch. Alleen je weet het niet. Dus ja, dat is een beetje een soort gekke redenering. Maar dat inzicht van iemand aanspreken op zijn of haar identiteit. Ja. Dus niet, jij bent innovatief, maar you are an innovator. Dat mensen dus ook dan meteen weer denken, oh ja, dat ben ik ook. Waardoor ze dus ook meer vernieuwende dingen gaan doen. Ja. En toestaan. Het is zo'n simpel ding, want het zijn echt letterlijk een paar letters verschil. Maar het maakt gewoon wel echt heel veel uit.
Ja, en dat vind ik ook het leuke aan dit. Want vaak als je nieuwe dingen wil leren, er zit er iets leuks aan. Ik ga nieuwe dingen leren. Maar vaak betekent het ook dat je los moet laten wat je altijd al deed. Een beetje identiteitspunt krijg je dan. Is hier helemaal niet. Nee. Je kunt vooral dingen bereiken door gewoon betere woorden te gebruiken. En door ze beter in te kleden. Ja. En daar hou ik wel van. En een van de voorbeelden die ook in zijn boeken staat, maar die we in het gesprek niet konden doen, is bijvoorbeeld, hoe laat je mensen een review geven over jouw bijvoorbeeld restaurant. En dan hoor je dat hij zegt bijvoorbeeld, als je mensen een review laat geven, zegt het eten was hier lekker, of het eten is hier lekker. Dat is maar één verschil.
Want je bent geneigd om te zeggen, een review om terug te kijken, maar daarmee impliceert het eigenlijk ook, misschien was dat een momentopname, misschien is het nu wel niet meer lekker.
Misschien had je wel mazzel dat het deze keer weer lekker was. Maar als je mensen vraagt om een review te geven in de present tense, dus in de tegenwoordige tijd, dan is die veel krachtiger.
Ja, dan wordt het echt gewoon een statement. Het is niet geweest, het is hier nog steeds lekker.
Het is hier altijd lekker. Ja. En ik hou ervan, want qua gevoel heb je meteen het idee van, damn, dit wist ik niet en dit kan ik gewoon meteen gebruiken.
En wat ik ook een hele mooie vond, dat was een...
wat je een hele mooie vindt,
natuurlijk. Heel goed. Ja. Dat is een langer en complexer voorbeeld, maar met die 7 woorden en daarna het verhaal van Donald die gaat kajakken en dat soort dingen. Dat deed mij ook realiseren dat beïnvloeding gaat dus niet per se over het moment dat jij een verzoek doet of hoe je iets inkleedt op dat moment, maar ook om een stuk daarvoor. Dus die 7 ogenschijnlijk random woorden, die bepalen dus hoe je naar iets kijkt. En als je dat dan weer terugvertaalt, dit was natuurlijk een soort van wetenschappelijk voorbeeld, maar in een vergadering is dat natuurlijk ook aan de hand. Ja. Daar heb je een discussie vooraf of dan wordt een voorstel wordt ingeleid. En de woorden die je daar kiest bepalen dus hoe het voorstel wordt ontvangen. Terwijl het voorstel zelf precies hetzelfde kan blijven.
Ja. Als je bijvoorbeeld een voorstel hebt om iets te doen aan de klantgerichtheid van je bedrijf, dan kan je zeggen, joh, we zijn hartstikke goed bezig en we staan bekend als een heel klantgerichte organisatie. En dan doe je bijvoorbeeld een voorstel dat nog beter maakt. Maar als je zegt, jongens, we hebben af en toe echt wel problemen met klantgerichtheid in dit bedrijf. Hè? X, Y, Z. En je presenteert daarna hetzelfde voorstel, gaat het totaal anders vallen. Dus als je gaat nadenken over de tone of voice die mensen bij spreken in hun hoofd tegen zichzelf moeten vertellen, voordat je je voorstel doet, dan kun je dus de kans op succes echt vergroten.
Ja.
En daar was ik wel een beetje van onder de indruk. En jij bent natuurlijk ook taalfriemelaar in alles wat je doet op LinkedIn. Dat boek Magic Words moet wel voor jou een
goudmijn.
Ja, toch?
Zeker,
ja.
Zeker. En 27 november komt Jonah Berger dus naar Nederland. En dan krijg je dus niet alleen maar Jonah Berger, maar ook Sharon Kroes, Jan van Zetten, Remco Klaassen, Jos
Eva
Burgers,
ja.
Eva Brouwer,
Jitske Kramer.
Ja. En wat ik heel leuk vind, is dat al die sprekers allemaal vanuit hun eigen vakgebied eigenlijk allemaal tips over overtuigen, psychologie, beïnvloeden, pakken. En het ook zo praktisch maken dat je er meteen weer wat aan kan.
Ja.
Dus dat is een hele leerzame dag.
Zeker. En het is ook qua stijl. We hebben een verhalenverteller in. We hebben er een powerbooster, een motivational speaker in. We hebben een antropoloog. We hebben een presentatietrainer. Dus het is ook qua vorm. Want vaak kun je een bepaalde vorm ook maar zo lang hebben. Maar daar zit het ook wel mee gebeiteld.
En het is zo populair dat je hebt moeten verplaatsen naar een grotere zaal.
Ja.
Dus het is te doen in Utrecht, in het Beatrix Theater.
Ja.
27 november. Volgens mij zijn er nog een paar kaarten.
Ja, we zitten nu boven de 750 mensen. En er kunnen er een kleine 1000 in. Dat weet jij ook, Christ. Dus er kan nog wat bij.
Moet je wel snel zijn. www.denkproducties.nl. En hopelijk zien we je daar. Zo niet, blijf luisteren naar DenkTank. Als je dit een interessante aflevering vindt, vergeet niet om deze even te liken, een review achter te laten en of door te sturen naar collega's, vrienden en andere bekenden. En tot de volgende keer.
Tot de volgende keer. Dank voor het luisteren.